When the sun dropped behind the ridge in an Appalachian hollow, the darkness that swallowed the cabin was total. No street light, no glow on the horizon, nothing but black. For most families up those creeks, electricity didn't arrive until the 1940s, and some hollows waited clear until the 1950s. Yet children were raised, babies were born, and whole winters were survived in a blackness so complete you couldn't see your own hand in front of your face. Number 9 on this list could light a room all night long using something that grew on a rotting log. And number 3 kept a family's only fire alive across miles of mountain trail. These weren't hobbies. They were the difference between making it to morning and not. Before we start, hit that subscribe button because your great-grandparents knew things we've completely forgotten. Let's count them down. Number 25, banking the fire. Before matches were common and long before anyone flipped a switch, the hardest thing in a mountain cabin was keeping fire alive through the night. Your great-grandmother knew the answer before bed. She'd rake the glowing coals into a tight pile at the back of the hearth, then cover them over with a thick blanket of gray ashes. That ash acted like insulation, choking off the air just enough to keep the embers smoldering slow instead of burning out. By first light, she'd sweep the ashes aside, blow gently on the orange heart still living underneath, and feed it dry kindling until it caught. A good banking meant no cold start, no borrowing fire from a neighbor a mile down the creek. Get it wrong, and the whole family woke to a dead, freezing hearth. This one skill, done right every single night, was the quiet engine of the whole household. Number 24, rendering tallow and dipping candles. Store-bought candles cost money nobody had, so light was something a family made with their own hands. After hog-killing time in the cold of November, your kin saved every scrap of beef and deer fat, then rendered it down slow in a big iron kettle until it turned to clear, golden tallow. They'd twist cotton or milkweed fiber into wicks, tie a row of them to a stick, and dip them again and again into the warm fat, letting each coat harden in the cold air before the next. 20 or 30 dips built a candle thick enough to burn for hours. The whole cabin smelled of hot fat and smoke on candle dipping day. A winter's worth of light hung drying from the rafters, pale and homely. Nobody wasted a candle stub. When it burned low, the last of it went back in the pot. Number 23, splitting lightard. Every mountain family knew the secret buried inside old pine stumps. When a pine tree died and rotted, the sap gathered and hardened in the heartwood, soaking it through with turpentine until it turned amber and heavy. Folks called it lightard, or fat lighter, or lighter knot. Your great-grandfather could split a fist-sized chunk off a stump, shave a few curls with his knife, and that wood would catch from a single spark and burn like a torch, even soaking wet. One good pine knot could start a fire on the worst rainy morning of the year, when everything else in the woods was too damp to light. Families guarded their lightered stumps like treasure and passed down which hillsides held the richest ones. A box of it by the hearth was insurance against every cold, dark dawn. We buy fire starters now. They had them growing in the ground. Number 22, the Betty lamp and the grease lamp. Long before kerosene came up the mountain, light came from grease itself. A Betty lamp was a small iron dish with a lip on one end and a hook to hang it by. Your family filled it with melted fat or fish oil, laid a twisted rag wick along the lip so the tip hung out, and lit it. The wick drank the grease up and burned with a small smoky orange flame, enough to see your hands by, enough to work a little after dark. It smelled strong and it dripped, so a drip pan hung underneath to catch what fell. It wasn't much light, but on a moonless night, it was the difference between blind and seeing. That little iron cup, hung by the door, was the first thing a mountain woman reached for when the black came down. Number 21, trimming the coal oil wick. When kerosene, which mountain folks called coal oil, finally made its way up the creeks around the turn of the century, the glass lamp became the prized possession of the house. But a lamp was only as good as the hand that tended it. Your great-grandmother trimmed that cotton wick every single day, snipping it flat and even, because a ragged wick smoked and blackened the chimney glass in minutes. She kept that glass polished clear so every bit of light got out. She knew exactly how high to turn the wick, high enough to see by, low enough not to smoke the room or waste precious oil. A gallon of coal oil had to last, and it cost real cash money at the store down the mountain. Tending that lamp was a daily ritual, a small act of care that turned a jar of oil into an evening you could live in. Number 20, the pine knot torch. Getting from the cabin to the barn on a black winter night was its own danger, and a fragile candle wouldn't survive the wind. So your kin reached for a pine knot torch, a length of that same resin-rich lightered wood lit at one end. It burned hot and bright and stubborn, throwing enough light to cross the yard, check the stock, or walk a neighbor part way home. Hunters and folks headed to a nighttime meeting carried them for miles, the flames bobbing along the ridges like slow orange stars. Children learned early to hold one downwind, so the smoke blew back and away. On the darkest nights of the year, a torch was the only thing standing between a person and a broken leg in a creek bed. It was fire you could carry in your fist, and out in that mountain dark, that was everything. Number 19, navigating the cabin blind. Here's something we've completely lost. In a hollow with no light for miles, your family could move through a pitch-black house without knocking over a single thing. They knew it by heart, the exact number of steps from the bed to the door, where the table sat, which floorboard creaked, how far to reach for the water bucket. A mother could cross the room to a crying baby in total darkness and never miss. Children were taught the layout until their feet remembered it. This wasn't a party trick. Fumbling for a lamp every time meant wasted oil and lost sleep, so a family learned to live half their night hours by feel alone. Their whole world was mapped in muscle and memory. We panic when the power blinks off. They spent half their lives moving sure-footed through a dark we can barely imagine. Number 18, signal hollers and dinner horns. In a hollow, your nearest neighbor might be a mile off through thick timber, and after dark, hollering was the only telephone anyone had. Mountain families developed real signal systems, a certain call for supper, another for come quick, another that carried the news of a death. Some blew a cow horn drilled out to make a long, low note that rolled up the ridges and could be heard for miles. Others used a dinner bell with a rhythm the whole family knew. A single pattern of blasts could summon help in an emergency when running for a doctor meant hours. Children learned the calls before they could read. The sound of a horn echoing off the mountain walls after nightfall meant something, and every family in earshot stopped to listen. In the dark, your voice and a horn were how you reached across the whole valley. Number 17, reading the weather before nightfall. When you had no radio and no forecast, a bad storm rolling in after dark could be deadly for stock and family alike. So your great-grandparents learned to read the sky and the land like a book. A ring around the moon meant rain within a day. Cattle lying down, smoke hanging low, the ache in an old man's knee. All of it told the coming weather. Katydids calling early meant an early frost. The way the leaves turned their pale undersides up in a rising wind warned of a storm before a cloud showed. Reading these signs before sunset meant getting the animals penned, the wood hauled in, and the shutters fastened while there was still light to work by. Get caught unprepared in the mountain dark by a sudden storm, and you might lose a night's warmth or worse. They didn't guess. They knew. Number 16, the spring house. Here's the first thing folks always ask about. With no icebox and no power, how did anything keep? The answer was the spring house, a small stone or log building set right over a cold mountain spring. The water ran through a channel in the floor, holding steady at that deep, cool mountain temperature all year round. Your family set crocks of milk, butter, and buttermilk down in the running water, where the cold kept them fresh for days in the dark of that little building. It stayed dim and cool inside even in the heat of August. A trip to the spring house was part of the daily rhythm, morning and evening, in and out of that gloom. It was refrigeration built from stone and running water, needing no power at all, and it worked so well that some old spring houses are still cool inside to this day. Number 15. The root cellar. Right alongside the spring house was the root cellar, dug straight back into the hillside where the earth held a steady chill and total darkness year-round. This was where a whole winter's survival was stored. Potatoes, turnips, cabbages, apples, jars of green beans and kraut, all packed into that dark, cool, earthen room where they wouldn't freeze and wouldn't sprout. The darkness mattered as much as the cold because light made potatoes turn green and spoil. Your family buried root vegetables in sand or straw to keep them longer still. Going down into that black cellar with a lamp to fetch supper was an everyday errand, and a full root cellar in the fall meant a family could sleep easy through the leanest months. An empty one meant a hungry, frightening winter. That dark hole in the hillside held the difference between the two. Number 14. Making lye soap from ashes. Store soap was a luxury, so mountain families made their own from two things they always had: ashes and fat. All winter, your great-grandmother saved hardwood ashes in a barrel called an ash hopper, then poured water through them slow. The water dripping out the bottom came out as lye, sharp and strong. She'd test it the old way, floating an egg or a potato to judge the strength. Then she boiled that lye together with the saved kitchen grease in a big iron kettle over an open fire, stirring for hours until it thickened into soap. Poured out to set and cut into rough brown bars, it cleaned everything from work shirts to floors to skin. It was harsh, but it worked, and it cost nothing but labor and know-how, a skill built entirely from the leftovers of fire and cooking, turning waste into one more thing a family never had to buy. Number 13. Spinning and carding by firelight. The dark hours weren't idle hours. While the men mended harness, your great-grandmother and the girls turned raw wool and flax into thread and cloth by the light of the fire. Carding combs pulled the tangled fibers straight. The spinning wheel hummed as a skilled hand drew the wool out into an even thread. A rhythm learned so deep, the hands did it almost without looking, which was a blessing when the light was so dim. Firelight was enough because the fingers already knew the work. Every stitch of clothing, every blanket against the mountain cold started here in the flickering dark of a winter evening. The soft whir of the wheel was the sound of a family staying warm and clothed. It was work you could feel your way through, turning the long black hours after supper into next winter's coats. Number 12. The star clock. With no clock on the wall, how did a family know the hour in the dead of night? Your great-grandfather read the stars. The Big Dipper wheels around the North Star through the night like the hand of a great clock, and mountain folk learned to read its position to tell roughly how many hours were left till dawn. The rising and setting of certain bright stars marked the seasons and the time. A man who had to be up before light to walk to work or tend a sick cow could step outside, glance up, and know almost to the hour where the night stood. On a clear night, the sky over the mountains was the only timepiece anyone needed, and it never needed winding. We check a glowing screen. They looked up at a wheel of stars turning slow above the ridgeline and read the night like a face. Number 11. Night hunting with dogs and lanterns. Some of the family's meat came only after dark. Coon and possum move at night, so your kin took to the woods with a pack of dogs and a lantern, following the baying through the black timber. The dogs treed the animal, and the hunter's lantern light caught the shine of eyes high in the branches. It took real skill, knowing the dogs' voices, reading the land in the dark, keeping your footing on steep ground you could barely see. A good night's hunt put food on the table and a little fur money in the family's pocket. These hunts were also where fathers taught sons the mountain after dark, how to move quiet, how to listen, how not to get lost. The lantern swinging through the trees and the sound of the hounds echoing off the hills was a working night, not a sport. Number 10, snake and critter awareness after dark. Here's the danger nobody talks about. Copperheads and rattlers don't quit when the sun goes down, and on a warm summer night, they'd be out on the very paths a family walked, so your great-grandparents developed a sharp night sense for danger underfoot. They never stepped where they couldn't see. They shuffled and tested the ground on a dark trail, carried a stick to sweep ahead, and knew to check the woodpile and the outhouse path with a light before reaching or stepping. Children were taught these rules young, because a snake bite miles from any doctor in the dark was a nightmare. This constant quiet caution, this habit of respecting what the darkness hid, was survival knowledge passed down like scripture. They didn't fear the dark, they just never got careless in it, because carelessness in a mountain hollow after nightfall could cost a life. Number 9, foxfire. Now here's the one that sounds like a fairy tale but was absolutely real. Deep in the damp mountain woods, certain fungi growing on rotting logs give off a faint, ghostly green glow in the dark, cool light with no flame at all. Mountain folk called it foxfire. Children gathered chunks of the glowing wood and carried it home like a treasure, and it truly did put off enough soft light to make out shapes in a pitch-black room. Some old-timers swore they read the faint glow like a nightlight, marking a doorway or a path. It cost nothing and burned nothing. It was simply light that grew in the forest, waiting on a rotten log for anyone who knew to look. A whole way of life ran on this kind of knowledge, on knowing that even the dead wood of the mountain had a secret light in it if you understood the woods well enough to find it. Number 8, storytelling and ballads in the dark. When the light was too precious to burn just for the sake of seeing, families spent the long, black evenings on something that needed no light at all, their own voices. Your great-grandparents kept whole libraries in their heads, ancient ballads carried over from the old country, ghost tales, family history, riddles and songs. In the dark by the dying fire, the old folks passed it all down, note for note and word for word, to children who would carry it another generation. This wasn't just entertainment. It was how a family remembered who they were, how they taught right from wrong, how they filled the frightening dark of a mountain night with something warm and human. The murmur of a story or the thread of an old tune in a black cabin was the sound of a culture keeping itself alive, one dark evening at a time. Number 7, the granny woman's night medicine. When sickness or a birth came in the dead of night, and it always seemed to, there was no calling an ambulance. The family called the granny woman. These were the mountain healers and midwives, keepers of generations of herb lore, and they worked by lamplight in the smallest hours. Your great-grandmother might have known a dozen remedies herself. Bone-set tea for fever, a poultice for a wound, ginseng and yellow root dug from the hills. The granny woman came through the dark with her basket and stayed till the crisis passed, delivering babies and easing the dying with skills learned at another woman's side. In a place where a doctor was a full day's ride away, this knowledge was the only medicine most families would ever have. That someone would walk a black mountain trail in the middle of the night to help a neighbor and know exactly what to do when she arrived was the beating heart of these communities. Number 6, reading the fire. To us, a fire is a fire. To your great-grandparents, The hearth was a tool with 100 settings, and reading it was a genuine skill. They knew which wood burned hot and fast for cooking, and which burned slow and steady for an all-night warmth. They could tell by the color of the coals and the smell of the smoke whether the fire was hungry or holding. They arranged the logs to bank the heat toward the room or drive a strong draft up the chimney. A woman cooked entire meals over that open fire, judging heat by holding her hand near the coals, moving the pot closer or farther, banking ashes over Dutch ovens to bake bread. The fire was stove, furnace, and lamp all at once, and mismanaging it meant cold food and a cold family. Understanding fire the way they did is a language almost nobody speaks anymore. Number 5, whittling and mending by touch. Idle hands were unheard of, and much of the evening's work got done with barely any light at all, guided by feel. Your great-grandfather could sit by the fire and whittle an axe handle, a chair rung, a spoon, or a toy for a child. His knife finding the shape by touch as much as sight. The women darned socks and patched clothes with fingers that knew the needle in near dark. Repairs that kept a family going, a mended harness, a whittled peg to fix a broken tool, all came out of these dim evening hours. The skill wasn't just the craft. It was doing it without needing to burn precious light. Hands that had done a thing 10,000 times didn't need to watch themselves. That quiet competence, working wood and cloth by feel beside a low fire, was how a household kept itself whole and mended. Number 4, finding the path home in the dark. Getting caught out after nightfall, coming back from a neighbor's or a late hunt, meant finding your way home through woods with no light and no trail you could see. Your kin navigated by everything but their eyes. They followed the sound of a particular creek, the feel of a familiar rise in the ground underfoot, the shape of a ridge line just barely darker than the sky. They knew their home ground so intimately that their feet found the path their eyes couldn't. A change in the air, cooler and damper, told them the creek bottom was near. The smell of wood smoke meant home was close. Losing your way on a mountain in the black could mean a cold night out, or worse, so this deep, bone-level knowledge of the land was a genuine survival skill. They carried the whole map of their world inside them, and it never went dark. Number 3, carrying live coals across the mountain. Here's the one that shows just how precious fire was. If a family's hearth went cold and matches were scarce or gone, relighting from scratch could take ages or prove impossible on a wet day. So mountain folk kept fire alive by carrying it. Your great-grandmother might scoop glowing coals into an iron pot or a cast-iron skillet, cover them with ashes to make them last, and carry that living fire from a neighbor's cabin miles across the ridge to relight her own dead hearth. Some carried coals in a horn or a metal bucket, feeding them a little tinder to keep them breathing on the long walk. To let the family fire die completely was almost a disgrace, and borrowing fire from a neighbor was an old and sacred courtesy of the mountains. Fire was so hard to make and so vital to keep that people literally carried it alive through the dark from house to house. Number 2, teaching children the dark. Perhaps the greatest skill of all was the one the parents worked hardest at, raising children who were not helpless in the dark. From the time they could walk, mountain kids were taught to trust their feet and their ears, to fetch water in the dark, to tend the fire, to move through the black cabin and the black yard without fear or fumbling. They learned the snake rules and the fire rules and the paths home. A child who panicked in the dark was a danger to themselves and a burden to the family. So darkness was made ordinary, just another part of a day that started and ended without electric light. By the time they were grown, they carried every skill on this list. That deliberate raising up of capable, calm, night-wise children was how the whole way of life survived generation after generation up those lonesome creeks. And finally, number 1, handing it all down. In the end, the single most important mountain skill was the one that held all the others together, passing the knowledge on. None of these skills lived in a book. They lived in hands and voices, taught by a grandmother at the hearth, a father in the dark woods, a granny woman at a bedside. Every banked fire, every dipped candle, every star read and coal carried was handed from one generation to the next by showing, doing, and remembering. This was a whole way of surviving that existed only in living memory, and it worked for hundreds of years. Then the power lines finally climbed the mountains, the lights came on, and within a single generation, almost all of it was gone. The chain that had never broken finally slipped. Those families didn't just endure the darkness, they mastered it so completely that they raised children, healed the sick, and built a rich, warm life in a black that would leave most of us frightened and helpless. So here's my question for you. Which of these skills surprised you the most? The foxfire glowing on a rotten log, the coals carried alive across the mountain, or the star clock turning above the ridge? Drop it in the comments, because these weren't just old habits. They were the hard-won wisdom of people who looked total darkness in the eye every single night and never once let it win. Your great-grandparents knew. Now you know too.